Why do women lose interest in sex? That's the common belief, but is it really true? And does it go beyond women? Because some studies show that couples today are actually having less sex than couples did 20 or 30 years ago. And the sharpest drop isn't among your grandparents. It's young couples in their 20s and 30s living together, married or not. I'm Ken LaCourte. I do my best to research into uncomfortable topics and tell you what I learn. And this one is fascinating because so many of the common beliefs about women and desire are just wrong. The stereotype says women cool off because they're just less sexual than men. The assumption is that evolution created men who would spread their seed far and wide, and women just didn't have to be that into it. But it doesn't really seem to be that. Today we'll start with the main question. Is it true that women lose interest in sex? Then we'll look at a gender divide and see how men and women's desire change in different ways throughout a relationship. We'll look at how overload and resentment can tank a sex life, along with how familiarity kills desire. And because I don't want to leave things totally hopeless, we'll look at how things can turn around. Let's start with the premise of the video. Is it true that women lose interest in sex? Or is that just an unfair stereotype? Well, yeah, they do. But in certain situations, and that's a part that everyone misunderstands. Women don't lose the ability to get aroused, and they don't lose the ability to enjoy sex. What really fades is that spontaneous, I need you right now feeling that had you both running into the bedroom in year one. That shift shows up clearly when you look at women in different contexts. A single woman, a woman in a new romance, or a woman having an affair often report high sexual interest. The desire didn't disappear, it just stopped working in the same relationship. In one British survey, 34% of women in long-term relationships said they'd lost interest in sex for at least 3 months during the past year. Less than half of men said the same, and the gap widened the longer the couples were together. Men's desire stayed pretty consistent, women's plummeted after the honeymoon phase. A German study that tracked over 1,800 young adults found the same pattern. Women's desire declined the longer they stayed with the same partner. Men didn't show that decline. What's interesting is that women don't suddenly become non-sexual. They shift from what researchers call spontaneous desire, waking up horny, thinking about sex unprompted, to a responsive desire. They don't feel a spark out of nowhere, but once something gets them in the mood, they can still get fully turned on and enjoy it. Dr. Rosemary Basson, a Canadian physician, created a popular Basson circular model of female sexual response. Before her work, clinicians relied on the Masters and Johnson model. Desire, arousal, plateau, orgasm, resolution. It's a straight line, and it's a pretty good model for men. But Basson argues that most women don't work that way, that a woman's sexuality is circular and context-dependent. They're more attuned to the relationship quality, their stress levels, their mood, and whether they feel an emotional connection. All of that affects whether or not they want sex, and in long-term relationships, most women don't feel that old spontaneous hunger, but they can still respond when the conditions are right. Their desire drops in specific situations, and it can come back when the context shifts. Before we go down the why path, I want to mention a great sponsor of this channel, Aura. And it makes me especially pleased because it's a product I've used for a while, and I'm really happy to recommend them. Because every day, data brokers are working at harvesting our personal information to sell it. Worse, scammers trade that and stolen data to hack into sites or impersonate you. Years ago, I got an $11,000 restaurant credit card charge out of the blue, and that was no fun. Aura gives you a real protection against all of that with a full suite of tools. They actively scrub your information off data broker sites and keep it off. They monitor the dark web 24/7 to see if your data's been stolen and alert you if there's a problem. And I tell you, it's weird getting a notification from them where you can literally see one of your compromised passwords. Aura also gives you a VPN, antivirus protection, and to figure out how to reduce spam phone calls, which drive me nuts. And they bundle all of these protections into one dashboard that makes it easy to monitor. I vetted these guys, they're legit, and they work. They're giving us a 2-week free trial at aura.com/Ken LaCourte, or you can scan this QR code. If you care about your security, and you should, check them out. All right, back to sex. So when we're looking at a falling sexual interest, we see a gender divide and find that women aren't the only ones who lose interest. Men do too, but in a completely different pattern. Men's sexual desire tends to stay pretty steady throughout early and middle adulthood. What eventually hits them is age, falling testosterone, health and performance issues. What doesn't usually slow him down is familiarity. Most men stay attracted to their long-term partner even after decades together. They can still want sex with her, and often do, but they can also develop what you might call an itch for novelty. Depending on the survey, about 20% of men admit to cheating on a spouse, compared to about 13% of women. Now, admit to makes self-reported numbers like this a little hinky, but we also clearly see this pattern in porn use. And there are multiple studies that show what we instinctively know. Porn is a man's game. At every major stage in life or relationships, men turn to porn more than women do. It's another window into the same drive for something new. I mean, we're just wired differently. Men more often crave variety, even when they're still fully attracted to their partner. A man can love his wife, find her sexy, and still feel that tug towards something new. For him, desire doesn't fade with the relationship, it fades with his aging body instead. But women's desire is different, and it's tightly tied to relationship dynamics and time. And as the relationship stretches on, women's spontaneous desire for that partner drops. You see it most clearly when they divorce or change partners. A woman who may have felt nothing for many years will often have those feelings completely revived with someone new. Inside of long relationships, a lot of women may not fantasize about sex or initiate out of the blue. But if the right atmosphere shows up, a date night, emotional connection, something that actually turns her on, her desire kicks in after the fact. A problem is that many women wait around for spontaneous desire that never shows up, so they stop initiating. Men end up doing all the initiating, and the whole rhythm slowly turns into him asking and her reacting. And when you add rejection into that mix, it can create real problems in a relationship. What's also interesting is that most women don't compensate by seeking novelty elsewhere. They stay faithful usually. They just want less sex. They're still emotionally invested and still loving the relationship, but sex itself drops way down the priority list. And if you want proof that this drop isn't just about men screwing things up, look at lesbian couples. Research shows that lesbian couples have the steepest decline in sexual frequency over time. There have been a lot of attempts to debunk or redefine those studies, but the numbers look consistent to me. In one well-known study, nearly half of women in relationships longer than 2 years were having sex once a month or less. Straight couples maintained a higher frequency than that, and male gay couples had the highest frequency of all. Two men together often chase variety and are more likely to open up their relationship to others. Two women together, they can slide into emotional intimacy, and it's often at the expense of sexual frequency. Straight couples, they tend to land somewhere in the middle. Men tend to drift outward while still wanting their partner. Women turn inward and feel less sexual when the conditions aren't right. Two different systems reacting to time in two totally different ways. Okay, so let's talk about one factor that's cited very often by people for a decline in women's sexual interest, but it needs some nuance. Overload and resentment. There's truth to it, but it's more complicated than men should do more chores to get laid. Personally, I've never met a guy who's dusted and mopped his way back into an active sex life. But if a woman thinks his lack of help is a problem and grows resentful, it does put a damper on things real quick. Studies show that women who feel overburdened by housework or childcare report significantly lower sexual desire. One survey of over 700 partnered mothers found that the ones who felt they carried a disproportionate share of household labor were way less interested in sex. Also, men often look to sex as an escape from stress, while a lot of women experience the opposite. Stress is an off switch. They need their mind to stop racing before they can even think about getting in the mood. And resentment, it makes everything worse. If she feels like she's doing everything while he's playing video games or scrolling on his phone, whether it's true or not, that anger doesn't stay in the kitchen. It follows her straight into the bedroom. I mean, you don't resent someone at 7 p.m. and want to sleep with them at 10 p.m. There's also a post-baby crash. Few life transitions lessen a woman's sexuality like becoming a mother. Her hormones plummet and estrogen drops. Sleep deprivation dulls everyone's senses. And by the way, research shows that for each additional hour of sleep a woman gets, her sexual desire increases by 14%. That's not trivial, especially when you have a newborn. And it's not just physical, of course. There's a real identity shift. Many new mothers talk about feeling like they've stopped being a sexual person altogether. Their body becomes functional, a feeding station and a baby carrier, not something used for pleasure. Surveys back it up all over the place. Almost half of women report low or no interest in sex at 6 months postpartum. Some can take over a year to feel like themselves again. And for some women, there's also pain involved. At 3 months postpartum, more than 60% of women report pain during intercourse. When your brain starts associating sex with pain, That shuts down desire a lot. Hormones and medications play a role too. SSRIs, antidepressants, are widely prescribed and they're notorious for killing libido or making an orgasm nearly impossible. Hormonal birth control can also blunt desire for some women. They're usually not the root cause, but they can take a struggling sex life and push it off a cliff. By the time you're a decade into a relationship, you're not looking at one cause. You're looking at a bunch of them. A woman doesn't just wake up one morning and decide she's done with sex. It's usually a slow accumulation of small pressures, all pulling in that direction. But the good news is that many of these pressures can change. Okay, so I touched on this earlier, but it's worth a closer look. Familiarity can kill desire. It's an uncomfortable reality and the plot of every middling rom-com about marriages in trouble. But why does it happen? The human brain is built to perk up around novelty. New smells, new bodies, new experiences, all of it hits the dopamine switch. When you see the same thing enough times, that reaction flattens out. Early in a relationship, everything about your partner feels electric. Years later, your brains fully map their body, their habits, their moves. You know exactly what's going to happen, and research shows that arousal drops when people are exposed to the same erotic cues on repeat. But it jumps up when something new comes along. It's sometimes known as the Coolidge effect, named after President Calvin Coolidge. The story goes, whether it's 100% true or not, that he and his wife were touring a chicken farm. Mrs. Coolidge noticed a rooster going at it constantly and asking the farmer how often that happens. "Dozens of times a day," he said. She smiled and said, "Tell that to Mr. Coolidge." When the president got the message, he asked, "Same hen every time?" "Oh no," said the farmer, "different hen each time." The president nodded and said, "Tell that to Mrs. Coolidge." Okay, that's probably the last farm joke I'm ever going to tell on this channel. So, weirdly, intimacy can also get in the way of eroticism. I mean, it's great for the emotional part of your relationship, but it's bad for encouraging straight-up lust. Couples merge their lives, routines, finances, emotional worlds. Psychotherapist Esther Perel says love thrives on knowing everything about someone, but desire needs a little mystery. You need a sense that your partner is still their own person, not just an extension of you. You can adore someone and not feel that pull towards them because the mystery is gone. Women can also lose desire when they feel more like a mom to their partner than a lover. I mean, it's hard to feel turned on by someone you're managing or nagging. And the same thing happens on the flip side. A man who's constantly playing therapist or project manager to his wife doesn't necessarily feel like her lover either. When the roles collapse into one person, the erotic part can get squeezed out. And let's be honest, sometimes a partner's physical decline plays into it. If a guy gains weight and looks like a slob, her desire is going to take a hit. There's something to the idea that you should be someone who she wants to have sex with. And it obviously cuts both ways. Women who stop prioritizing their own physical and mental health, they can't expect their partner to stay endlessly turned on. So put it all together and you can get a perfect storm. Not because monogamy can't work and not because women aren't sexual, but because long-term relationships naturally drift into patterns that suffocate the spark unless both people protect it. Which brings us to how things can turn around. Okay, so back in my day, there was a hugely popular 4'7" sex therapist with a German accent. Her name was Dr. Ruth Westheimer. And honestly, she was great. Now, that just doesn't feel like my role in life, but I want to take just 2 minutes to talk about solutions because there are distinct camps when it comes to fixing boring bedrooms. Walk into any bookstore and you'll see shelves of sexual advice books, and most are written by women. And the message, it's pretty consistent. Help out with housework, show affection throughout the day, reduce her stress, listen without fixing, build intimacy outside the bedroom, and make her feel appreciated. All of that is solid advice, not just for sex, but for helping out your partner in general. And I don't minimize the overload and resentment stuff I talked about earlier, but there's a whole other world of advice out there that flips much of that script. The manosphere and red pill guys, they start with a different premise. Focus on yourself first. Get in shape, dress better, build something in your professional life, develop real friendships and social status. Handle things around the house, not because you're trying to trade chores for sex, but because a guy who does things like that, he's just more sexually attractive than those who don't. Now that philosophy sometimes goes off the rails, and guys can use it as a license to be an a-hole. But that's a mistake. The underlying point is that traditional masculinity, confidence, capability, purpose, strength, it's attractive to most women whether they articulate it or not, whether they even fully comprehend it or not. A man who's genuinely building his life and doesn't need constant validation from his wife/mommy He creates a different dynamic than a man who's trying to nice guy his way into the sack. Look, everybody's relationships are different, but it's definitely worth knowing that there are competing philosophies out there if you're ever looking to step things up. So, women don't lose interest in all sex. They lose interest in sex under specific conditions that long-term relationships tend to create. Sameness, stale routines, and all of those other things. Change the conditions, and their desire can come back. I've seen it. Okay, so we've been talking about sex. Now let's shift that a bit to nudity, but not the good kind. There's a thing that often happens when people have a mental or emotional breakdown. They take off their clothes. In airports, restaurants, even in the middle of traffic. So, what's that all about? Click on the link of this video that I produced, and you'll have your answer in a few minutes. I think you'll like it. I'm Ken LaCourte. Thanks for watching. I hope it was worth your time.